Hi, everybody. My name is Grant Souter, and this is my visual personal teaching reflection that I'm calling Education Around the World because my experience as an educator could not be disconnected from my experience as an educator who traveled and lived and worked overseas for most of his career. But my journey did begin here in the town of Bloomington Normal. And in fact, this is my family. My wife and I both grew up here, and we both went to ISU, and we both um, graduated from ISU in 2003 with our bachelor's in. I had bachelor's in music ed. She had a bachelor's in elementary ed. Um, but to be honest, I was really mostly focused on being a musician and living and traveling and touring and making music and writing music. And I wasn't super focused on my experience as an educator at ISU. However, I did manage to learn a couple of things. I do recall Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences being really important. I also recall that Vygotsky's zone of proximal development was an important concept for me to kind of unpack. And then also, I think Bloom's taxonomy was a big deal then. Not the updated one, but kind of the older version was a big deal. I think what I recall most about learning about these three things was that I wasn't a terribly good student in school, in high school, and I struggled a lot with um, having self confidence and feeling that I was able to learn. And these three things kind of opened up the avenue of possibilities that all people are capable of learning lots of different things in different ways. The other most powerful thing that I learned at ISU was just the through my general music classes, the ORF approach to music education, which is a really progressive and thoughtful and creative way to explore education, and kind of really shaped my thinking about obviously music education, but also education more generally. So after graduating at ISU in 2003, my wife and I both we got married, and then we moved up to Minneapolis, where I pursued my graduate studies at the University of Minnesota in double bass performance. And again, I was really focused on just being a musician. I wasn't at this point thinking about education at all, and really the probably the most responsibility I had to someone else was thinking about my little cat Tipton. But after finishing up my time in Minneapolis, my wife and I decided to sign up for a international school job fair, which actually took us to a school all the way on the other side of the planet in Jakarta, Indonesia. The school is called North Jakarta International School, and it was a fantastic little school that really guided us early along in our journey. For being a new teacher, this school allowed me to wear lots of different hats. I was a pre-K through grade 8 music teacher. I taught mostly general music, but I also taught strings and choir. But to be honest, we spent a lot of time with backpacks on, just kind of traveling the world. Um, but really useful things that we learned at the school were things like curriculum mapping, which is the kind of the concepts from Heidi Hayes Jacobs, and also unit planning, especially through Understanding by Design, which is Grant Wiggins and Jay McTee. But most notably, this is where our family began, where we had our first son, Judah, and everything kind of changed from there. After Jakarta, we moved on to Hanover, Germany, to kind of experience a European flavor of life. I took a job at a school called Forums Bilingual School, and here, we continue to just kind of travel Europe and learn about things over there. But educationally, this is where I really started to kind of make sense of the educational world, mostly through comparison. So I was working in a bilingual school, as I mentioned, but also I was surrounded by concepts that were such as Waldorf Schule or the Steiner schools. I mean, they're kind of the same thing. Also, just comparing the German system of kind of moving students onto paths. And then also, I further kind of moved into my understanding of the Orff Schulwerk approach, which again has a very holistic approach to kind of bringing the innate musicality of students into their real worlds, their real musical worlds. So but the other big thing I experienced in Germany was learning about education Twitter, which I quickly got very sucked into and learned lots of great things from lots of great educators. And again, um, so we also had our second child, Archer, in Germany. So after a couple of years in Germany, in 2010 we moved to Shenzhen, China, and there we worked at a wonderful school called QSI Shenzhen. QSI was an interesting place because it was had a couple of things going for it. It was mastery based, but it also had a parallel curriculum that was a kind of a character education curriculum, which was really interesting to learn about. So there was also, so there was mastery based, but then we also learned a lot about things like Marzano and choice theory. And then this was also a time where I was kind of investing in a lot of personal growth as well. So I was learning a lot about humane education, which was kind of the work of Zoe Weil, but there's a lot of holistic and humane educators that are kind of pursuing that work. And then I also started working on my second master's in environmental education and really focusing on service learning. During this time, I was starting to kind of develop an interest in neuroscience and how the brain works and the mind body connection. We also had our third child, Ida. She was born in Shenzhen, and we lived there for a few years before moving on. Our next stop took us from Shenzhen all the way to Rabat, Morocco, and we worked at a lovely little school called Rabat American School. This was probably the most traditional school, most American-like school that we worked in. During this time, you know, I was working on kind of finishing up my master's, but I was also, while trying to understand standards-based and the way that American schools were moving, I was really developing a pretty intense personal experience around meditation and yoga. Um, I took some training with Mindful Schools as a to become able to bring those things into the classroom. But I was also kind of personally just learning a lot about anti-oppression pedagogies and critical pedagogy, and this sort of where I began my path of understanding these theories, which sort of brings me back full circle all the way back to Normal, Illinois. I now live back here, and my wife and I both teach in town. I teach at the Metcalf Lab School and the University High School Lab School. And when I think about what my experience has been so far, I'm beyond convinced that that experience is the most powerful driver of learning, and whether it's kind of prompted by personal inquiry or by kind of environmental impositions or exchanges, as long as that experience is connected, relevant, through relevance and kind of meaningfully connected to the learner's life, it will be longer lasting. And in the classroom, there has to be a mix of these experiences provided by the teacher. And so, and I always, that's in a dialogic way, student to teacher, teacher to student. Lastly, learning should be integrated, not just curricular subjects, but also, through the spirit and the entire being of the student, through developing awe and wonder. So I think those are most of my thoughts on teaching and learning. It's hard to synthesize 16, 17 years of teaching into 5 minutes, but I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to grow as a learner. And who knows where our next adventure will take us after Bloomington.